Would you like a step-by-step tutorial to go from pieces of 12 by 12 patterned paper to 15 fast festive cards? Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I'm going to structure the video kind of like an online class where I really break things down in terms of the exact steps to complete each card. And I am going to use 3 pieces of patterned paper to make 15 cards with no scraps. It's going to be a little bit different than my paper busting templates because we're not going to make the exact same card from the pattern paper. We're actually have 2 different sketches, and so we're going to mix it up a little bit. Here are the 2 final cards. You're going to, from the 3 pieces of patterned paper, make 15 cards. 9 of them will follow this layout, and 6 of them will follow this layout. And there will be sketches in the coordinating workbook. So of course the video is free to watch and I'll be really clear with all the measurements, but you can purchase the workbook as a supplement to get a hold of the templates and sketches in order to recreate the cards. I will say the measurements so that you can write them down if you would like though. Okay, so let's get started talking about the supplies that you will need to complete these projects. Keeping in mind that we are making these 2 designs, we are going to need patterned paper that works on a small scale because some of our pieces, like these corner triangles or these strips of paper, are relatively small. And so when I picked my papers, and I am working with the Paper Rose Christmas Holly Basics collection, I tried to pick papers that had a small enough scale and also a couple other considerations. So when looking at this patterned paper, there were patterns like this that are really large scale. This is also pretty large scale as an example, but also I wanted to avoid things that had diagonal lines on them. I don't think that's a strict rule because if you notice, this red paper does actually have some diagonal lines, but they're quite subtle, and so I think that it was still worked out well, but something to keep in mind since I know that diagonals can be kind of popular. And then I did want to consider 3 papers that had different colors of background. Now, if I hadn't clearly said yet, you can use single or double-sided pattern paper and you can use directional pattern paper. And I will be using some directional pattern paper, but I will be using my papers as if they're single-sided. You won't see both sides. It's not impossible to see both sides. Like you could choose to do some things differently, but I'm going to be treating them like single-sided paper. And it's what I'm kind of in general recommending, that either you pick single-sided paper or paper that you only want to use one side of. And then I am going to consider papers with 3 different colors in the background because I will be layering them directly on top of each other. I think that if I picked 3 different green papers, now if they were quite different colors of green or quite different colors of red, it could work. But it's something to keep in mind that the patterns are going to be laying right on top of each other. And so you do want to consider how they look in that formation for this particular card. Now they won't be doing that on this sketch, but I want to consider how it will look best for both of them. Okay, so in addition to my 3 pieces of 12 by 12 patterned paper, I need some additional supplies. I'm going to make 15 cards, so I am going to need some sheets of white cardstock to make my card bases. You need 8 sheets of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and you can cut them in half to make A2 size cards, and we'll talk about that. But this is important to mention, and I should have mentioned it earlier, you can also make these as A6 cards. So if you're outside of the US, and you have a different size, you have the A4 size of cardstock and you make them into A6 cards. Hopefully I'm saying those numbers right. The sketches will work, and you don't really have to do anything else differently than to make your card bases in that different size. And so again, you would just need 8 sheets. So you're gonna make 7 cards, and then there's an additional half sheet of cardstock that we can use for sentiments. We're going to need 1 color of ink. I've chosen a green ink today because I think that it will be a little bit, I think it would be easy to match for the pattern papers that I have chosen. The reds in this collection are a little bit pinky, so I thought the greens would be easier to match. You're going to need if you want to stamp your own sentiments, then you need the ink. The ink and the stamps are only if you need to stamp your own sentiments. This pattern paper pack did come with these sentiments, but I wanted to make sure this was super beginner friendly, and so you would know what to do if you didn't have something like this. And so if you want to stamp your own sentiments, we're going to use that extra half sheet of cardstock, some ink, and a stamp set with relatively small sentiments. So I chose this one from scrapbook.com, and I'm going to use Merry and Bright and 'Tis the Season, but there are a lot of different stamp sets out there that will work. And a stamp block to put your sentiment stamp on if you're going to be using that step. You are going to need a paper trimmer. When using tools like paper trimmers, please follow all manufacturers' safety instructions. You're going to need some kind of adhesive. I think that for the triangle card in particular, a liquid glue can be really helpful, but you could also use a tape runner, and I probably use a mix today. And then I would recommend a pack of coordinating ephemera, or like something to embellish your cards with. I have the Paper Rose Christmas Holly Quick Cards die cuts. You do not need something like this. If you have a collection of stamps, then you might want to stamp and color some images. You might have die cuts that you would like to use on it. With this particular set of example cards that I made, which was with a Recollections pad of paper, I cut these snow globes from one of the sheets of patterned paper. So just something to embellish with. I'm recommending coordinating embellishments because that's easy and beginner friendly, but there are different options out there. And these ones are ones that you need to punch out. You can purchase die cuts that don't have that requirement. And then something, when you, be very careful so that we don't rip any of these, but also die cuts like this. I'll kind of try to see if I can get an example to show you. Sometimes they have, I'm gonna see if I have a dark piece of paper to show it against. They have like little bits at the edge that are not quite straight, like little extra bits. You can cut those off if that really bothers you, or pick a pack of embellishments that won't have that imperfection because you're not tearing them apart anywhere. But these are the supplies that I will be using today. And then some additional optional things, although of course the sentiments also could be optional if you have an alternate, is something to organize your pieces in. I am going to use trays from scrapbook.com, and you could use envelopes as well, a scoring board, and a bone folder in order to score and fold in half your card bases. And I think a scissor can be helpful to have on hand, and it's something that I would probably use for cutting the sentiments apart and that kind of thing, but you could use the paper trimmer. Let's start by making our card bases. We have 8 sheets of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. You're going to follow this same procedure on all but one of them, because one we are going to leave half a sheet unused as a card base. And then we're going to start by, on the 11-inch side, we're going to measure to 5.5 inches. Then we will have 2 pieces that are 5.5 by 8.5. On one piece of one of your 8, you're going to reserve this to the side, and we'll talk about how to cut sentiments and make sentiments with that. The rest of them, you're going to make 15 cards. You can score your cardstock with a scoring board and bone folder. My scoring board did come with a tool way back when. I've lost it. I've had this for 10 plus years or more, who knows at this point. But I'm going to score it at 4 1/4. And that's using the bone folder to come down at that line there. And then I can fold it in half and use the bone folder to press along the edges. On that last one, where you have a 5.5 by 8.5 inch piece left over, you've already made all 15 cards. You're going to take this last piece of cardstock and cut it apart for some sentiments. You don't need to do this. You can have a different way of doing sentiments. If you have only larger sentiments, this might not work out, but it's just a recommendation. I'm going to cut them to 5.5 by 1/2 inch strips. So this is my 8.5 inch side. I'm starting by measuring it to 8 inches. So I'm just cutting the 1/2 inch off. and then to 7.5, 7, and I'll continue to cut 1/2 inch till I have all the 1/2 inch by 5.5 inch strips. And this will be more sentiments likely than I am going to need for today's card, but I do like to have some extra stamps just in case I have some imperfections with my stamping or any other issues. It can be nice to have a little bit of leftovers. Once I have these 5.5 by 1/2 inch strips cut, I am going to stamp my sentiments. I have Merry and Bright and 'Tis the Season from this stamp set. There's also a Happy Holidays, a couple other choices in here. You can, of course, use these larger sentiments. This particular stamp set has coordinating dies. However, some of these might be a little large scale for the cards that we are making, or then a sentiment this large would perhaps become more like a focal point on the card. So I am just going to show you this simple way of adding sentiments, and I am going to be using this Noble Fur ink cube from Lawn Fawn. I am going to stamp on each side of this 5.5 inch piece. So I am stamping on the right hand side and then on the left side. And another thing that I'm considering here is that I want to leave a little bit of room on each side of the sentiment, so that if I want to cut a sort of like banner shape, such as doing this, I have a little bit of room to do something like that. There are some other choices that you can do in terms of cutting a banner shape. The other thing to consider is when you're stamping with a stamp block, if you want to get a good impression, it's a good idea to place your stamp down and then just leave it pressed to the paper for a couple of seconds. Rather than doing like a really sort of quick stamp like that. Sometimes that works out. I also find that I tend to be a little bit more crooked. It's hard to center things and I don't get as nice of an image. So just, kind of slowing down just a little bit at this stage to make sure it's kind of centered on the top and bottom, and to make sure that the ink has a little bit of time to absorb into the paper before lifting the stamp up. My stamp block also has some grid lines to help me kind of to keep things a little bit straighter, and I will stamp on all of these strips till I have a wide variety of sentiments, or a large number of sentiments to use. And trying to do the math quickly in my head, there's 8.5 inches, each inch makes 2, so I would get, I believe, 17 strips of cardstock, and then I could stamp 2 sentiments on each. Now that means that of course there's room for larger sentiments, and you would still have enough because you'd have 17 strips, so if you want larger ones. But if you're using small ones like this, which I do think are generally appropriate to the size of the cards, then you can get more. The next step is where the workbook will come the most in handy. Just as an idea, this is of course not, there might be some fixes to the workbook, but as a general idea, you will get a supply list, you will get directions step by step for how to complete the cards with pictures, and you will get the cutting template and sketches, and the cutting template and sketches will also be separated out onto individual pieces of paper so that you can see them large, but then also you could see them all together. And then there will be a sketch with a sample picture next to it for reference. So we are going to look at the 12 by 12 cutting template as we cut the pieces of patterned paper. This is going to be the thing that you have to do most carefully in order to achieve these results. So I'll try to go really slow and careful and explaining exactly what I am doing step by step in order to achieve the final result. And all 3 pieces of patterned paper are going to be cut the same way. So I have cut the branding strips off the bottom. Not all 12 by 12 paper includes branding strips, and we are not using them in today's card. I don't consider them a scrap. You can put them on the inside of cards, but because not all 12 by 12 paper includes them, I don't include an explicit direction for what to do with them. So if we look at this cutting template, we are going to see that we need these 1/2" by 12" pieces. I am cutting them from the bottom of the pattern paper, which is what I will do here as well. And so because this paper is directional, this is the bottom. I'm going to cut the 1/2" strips off the bottom. I am going to be measuring those 1/2" strips first because it is difficult, especially with my guillotine trimmer, to just cut a tiny 1/2" off. So if I'm cutting a 1/2" off a larger piece as opposed to a smaller piece, that will work out better. And so I am measuring my 12 by 12 pattern paper to 11.5 and then cutting all along that 12" length. I'm going to repeat that by cutting it at 11. That will be another 1/2" off the bottom, making sure it is in fact the bottom, that I'm orienting my paper correctly. Then we're going to come back to those. The next piece is the height of this whole section is 4 inches. And so that is what I'm going to cut next, 4 inches off. So 10, 9, 8, 7, that is 4 inches from 11. So I want to make sure you can, of course, cut it the other way, like bringing it to 4 inches, but this is my preferred method. So bringing it to that 7" from 11, making sure that I line up the whole sheet to that 7" mark. And so I have a 4 by 12" piece, and I had 2 1/2 by 12" pieces. Then the same thing. This all the way across is 4 inches. So I'm going to measure 4 inches away, which will be at the 3" mark. Line the whole sheet of paper up, cut that, and that leaves me with this top sheet that is 3 all the way across. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm just trying to be really, really slow and specific. So let's revisit these 1/2" pieces. We are going to need these for sketch number 2. Sketch number 2, each of them, to be clear, I'm going to cut these at the 3" mark. So there'll be 3 inches by 1/2 inch, so 9, then 6, and then finally 3. And since it was a 6" piece, I have 2 pieces of 3. Each of sketch 2 is going to get, they're going to have 4 of these 1/2" strips and 1 of this 3 by 2" piece. And I already see a little typo there that will be fixed in the final draft, the final iteration. But I'm going to incorporate 2 strips for each card so I can start sorting these into my trays. Some of them are going to need 2 pieces of this green paper. I want to use a little bit of each pattern on each card. And so in the case of sketch 2, that means that each card is either going to get 2 strips of the one pattern, or its large rectangle will be that pattern. So that's why I'm putting 2 strips into a tray. And continuing that, I have 6 of these small trays because I will need 6 of those cards. And if I sort as I go, I will have less trouble with any like problems or mistakes at the end. So we're actually going to finish up sketch 2 first. And as you can see, we have this piece that is 12 by 4 inches. And these are the last 2 pieces we need for sketch 2. And so this piece that is 4 by 12 inches is going to be cut into 3 by 4 inch pieces each time. And so we're going to start with that. We're going to take this 12 and divide it into 4 pieces that are 3 inches wide each. So I'm cutting it at 9 because 12 minus 3 is 9, and then 9 minus 3 is 6, and 6 minus 3 is 3. So now I have 4 pieces that are 3 by 4. We're going to take one of them for sketch 2 and cut it to 3 by 2 inches. So cutting it in half on the 4 inch side till we are left with 2 pieces that are 3 by 2 inches. These are the last cards for sketch 2. So when I go to cut my next sheet of paper, some that have these green pieces are going to get a triangle, or sorry, going to get a rectangle, a large rectangle of another pattern, and then 2 strips of the third pattern. And then this one is going to get 2 strips of the second pattern and 2 strips of the third pattern. So hopefully that's clear. I'll bring it up again when I have all the pieces cut so that we can look at it very clearly. But I have, you know, a little bit of each of sketch 2 and separated out into those 6 containers because each card has its own container to keep things really, really clear. Okay, next we have these 3x4 inch pieces and we are ready to move into sketch number 1. Something that I want to point out about this cutting template is you'll notice that while there are all these 3x4 inch pieces are all cut on the diagonal, 3 of them are cut from the top left to the bottom right, and the other 3 are cut from the top right to the bottom left. And so it is important that you keep track of that because you're going to need your triangles to be separated out and put in each corner of the card. So if you'll notice, for instance, on these ones, this represents the top right of the card and the bottom left of the card. And then this represents the top left of the same card and the bottom right of the same card. So you need all of this for one card, and they need to be going in opposite directions. So that is why I think that having the cutting template can be quite helpful, but you absolutely do not need it, and that's why I'm taking the time to be so clear about that. So knowing that we are going to need to keep track of which way all of our triangles are facing, I think it is helpful to get all of these 3x4 inch pieces together at one time. I only have 3 of them. The other 3 we're gonna get from up here. As you notice, I've already found another typo. Sometimes it's only by trying to explain it out loud that I clear up a lot of these things. So I'll explain the measurements correctly, but if you're like screenshotting the templates or something, it's just something to keep in mind that there might be some slight changes here and there. Okay, so we need those 3x4 inch pieces. However, this last one that also takes up 3x4 inches of space they are only 1 inch wide. And so what I'm actually going to do here is start by cutting those 1x4 inch strips off the end. So 11, 10, and then 9. I'll put those to the side temporarily and cut the last 3x4s that I will need, measuring to 6 and then 3 inches. Okay, so again, these 1x4 inch pieces off to the side, we'll be revisiting them later. Here, we are going to need to cut our 3x4s on the opposite diagonals. So this paper is directional, so it's especially important that I do it correctly and keep it in mind. So I'm doing top left to bottom right, lining up the corners and cutting it on the diagonal and placing that in a tray. And then I'm going to cut, since I did top left to bottom right, now I'm going to do top right to bottom left. And then placing that in the same tray because that's all for the same card. Going ahead and doing the next set, top left to bottom right. Placing that in a tray. And now top right to bottom left. Placing that in a tray, all together, those 2 pieces. One final tray because we are going to be using different size, or a different pattern for the large triangles for the next set of cards. So that was top right to bottom left. I think I just changed up my order, but I'm just gonna go really slowly. So 3 cards of the 9 will have the green paper as the large triangles in the background, and then I'm going to keep cutting my green paper, but I'm going to go to new trays because none of the other cards will have more green triangles. They will have, more large green triangles, because that's all that we have of those. And then so, for instance, since these are large green triangles, I might pair it with medium red triangles and small holly triangles. Hopefully that is really clear, makes sense. And then when I cut a set that has like medium greens, I might be pairing it with large reds and small hollies, so that I have a complete set of triangles for each one. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is address those 1 by 4 inch pieces. We are going to cut them to 2 inches. And then we have to do the same thing where we cut top left to bottom right on one side, and then top right to bottom left for the second set. So I'm gonna go really nice and slow. The back of this green paper was a plaid, which I think, as you can, is kind of a good example. As you can see, it looks okay. But some people might not prefer like all the busyness of all the extra lines. So I am going to be using it on this side. Okay, so that's for one card. Then taking this 1 by 4 inch piece, cutting it to 1 by 2 inches, then cutting, this time I have top right to bottom left, and then top left to bottom right. And I kind of am like even just stopping at the end of each set of cuts to make sure that I have one for each corner. That can be helpful too, to kind of just pause and see. So you can see those would go like, each one has that corner piece where a card would go. And then I'll do that one final time. And I am only going to cut 1 sheet of patterned paper on camera, just because it is such a slow and careful process. But I'll show you at the end what it all like resulted in. And that's why I'm like, it's, I think, very helpful to keep track of all of your pieces as you go. And so now I'm wondering if I did something at some point to mess up, because it looks like this paper would be cut with those words going in the opposite direction. But maybe I'll look at my paper, because maybe it does have a mixed directionality on it. So that is for these 2 corners. And then we're going to make the top left and bottom right corners, like so. And so now we have just 1 bit of paper left, and we have the pieces for 6 of our 9 triangle cards. So the remaining piece of pattern paper we have should be 3 by 12 inches. And that represents this part of the template. And we are going to cut them into pieces that are 2 inches wide by 3 inches tall. And so I'm going to measure to 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. And I realize this is kind of like a complicated set of cutting to follow, but I just really liked how that final card looked. It's a card I've been trying to figure out how to do in a no scrap way for a really long time, and it's never turned out quite the way I wanted. And part of the way I was able to do it is by adding this secondary card with the leftover bits. And so I thought it was perfect for this class. And also I knew it was gonna be a longer video to try to explain this. And so I thought, well, then again, that's perfect for a class, because hopefully you guys will stick with me longer than like sort of like a more typical video where I kind of go a lot faster. And so again, we have 3 sets of rectangles. And each set needs to be cut in opposite ways and then arranged in their trays so that we know which pieces go together. That was top left to bottom right, and then we do the opposite, top right to bottom left. Make sure that they are cut opposite. Again, you can, pull them out to the corners of your tray to confirm that you've done it correctly, and then move on to the next set. If you cut two the same way, the reason I'm saying like to check between each set is then you could probably use, the next set, you could use one of them to fix your mistake by like cutting. If you cut two the same way, then you could cut the next two the same way and then cross them. Hopefully that makes sense. But I just really found it going slow to be the most important aspect of achieving this final result and keeping everything nice and organized. So there's one of each corner. Last one with the green paper. And then I will go over, again, we're gonna do the same exact cutting, but how to sort them into the trays when I am completing my next two pieces of paper. So now I have cut all three pieces of pattern paper, and I want to just remind you what all of that should look like. Again, I was being very deliberate in terms of keeping my pieces organized with one tray for each card. I highly recommend it for this particular set of sketches, because keeping track of all of these triangles and making sure they're going in the right direction certainly can be a little bit tricky. So I have a holly small, red medium, green large, and then I have that for each corner. And you can go through and kind of set that up for each one to check them if you want. Although again, if you've been doing this slowly and deliberately the whole time, you've been checking that step by step, but I'll kind of show you that that's what I have. I know that I am ready to complete the cards because I have one for each corner. And then each of these trays has a slightly different, well, sorry, not each tray, each set has a slightly different mix, right? So like this whole stack of 3 is green large. This whole stack of 3 is green holly, and this whole stack of 3 is green, is large holly, large green, large red. Ugh, so many of the same words. Okay, and then, switching up them all in between. And by keeping it organized, I didn't have a problem where I wanted to use red small on 2 different ones. I've organized the patterns as I went. And then similarly with sketch number 2, I have green strips, holly strips, large red rectangle, 2 of those. Red strips, holly strips, large green. So that I have a mix of each pattern on each one, 2 of those. And then large holly, green strips, red strips, large holly, green strips, red strips, right? So at this point, I am ready to start assembling the cards. But I did want to point out a couple things. That you can, if you have double-sided paper, now choose to mix up some of your patterns. I am not going to. I'm going to basically pretend this is single-sided paper just because I think it will be easier to interpret at the end. But say I, was going to assemble these cards, and instead of using the holly side, I wanted to use just for sketch number 2, the green wood side. I totally can. Or, either of these. Like I have, I think that this still reads really nicely, even in this 1/2 inch strip. I think any of these, like any combination, would look really nice. You can go ahead and use them in any way that you like. And similarly with the triangles, if you have been cutting them very carefully, even if they are directional. So I'll take a specific look at the one that includes some directionality. I'm just looking at the large green triangles because that paper has directionality. And they're the large pieces, so it's easiest to see how I would switch it. So if I wanted to use the other side, if I flip these over, these, they're the same shape, but again, flip these over and I just have to move the whole thing. and it still absolutely works. I'm just switching both sides. So you can go ahead and make whatever arrangement now suits you. But this is also a good example of why I don't particularly like the plaid, because it doesn't follow the same diagonal. And so I probably wouldn't use that side, but maybe using like this, again, it is that diagonal shape. It's not my favorite, but I could go ahead and switch it all up to look like this, or do any kind of combination of them that I see fit. And because I have carefully made sure that I have, you know, the right mix of patterns, the right directionality, all of that, I can switch them one for one. So I just wanted to point that out. That's not how I'll be finishing my cards, because again, I want it to be as clear as possible. I did also want to say, at one point I made a mistake in my cutting, and I could have made it work. It would have been totally fine, but because this video is about teaching you specifically and clearly how to do it, I didn't keep my mistake in. But I do that on other videos where I make a mistake and I show you how I make it work, and I believe in that. But this method of card making where you have to use every single inch of the paper the right way in order to leave no scraps does make it a little bit difficult when you make mistakes. And so sometimes it is helpful to have a second piece of paper so that you can, you know, even if you make a mistake and you're like, okay, I can still use that paper for something else, but it won't turn out exactly how this class shows, and I really want to do that. You know, having that second piece of paper or just starting over is sometimes the way that you have to do it because it is so precise. But I just also wanted to assure you that I make mistakes too, as you can see from the fact that I've had to like rewrite on my templates, but you know, even in the cutting and all of that. And often there are still ways to make things work, but you don't have to get too down on yourself for making those mistakes, because it happens to everyone. Okay, so in terms of assembly, each of sketch 1, there's 3 pieces in each corner, and then there are 4 corners, so there are 12 pieces on each one of these. And they need to be assembled such that they kind of all match up together in the corner, and then there's a specific order you need to assemble them on the card. So the first step I am going to do, and I'm going to demonstrate it on one card and then do the rest off camera, just because I'm kind of trying to think about this like as if we were, if I was trying to teach you a class in person, I wouldn't make you watch me glue them all. I would show you one example, and then I would go around, probably, you know, walk around the classroom and make sure everybody understood it and was gluing it correctly. Now, of course, I cannot come to your craft room and make sure that you are following the steps and you understood what I said. However, if you have questions, leave them in the comments, or send me an email or something like that. My email is always listed in the video description below. And again, hopefully, if there is any, hopefully the workbook would make it more clear as well, but I am happy to make sure that you can understand the directions even without the workbook. So the measurements, one more time, I've said them, and I'll try to again make sure that I stay clear throughout the whole process. This small triangle came from a 1 by 2 inch piece cut on the diagonal. Then medium triangle, 2 by 3 inches cut on the diagonal. The large triangle, 3 by 4 inches cut on the diagonal. And when I glue them down, and I am going to use liquid glue because I think that makes it easiest to make sure it gets up into the corner. I'm using scrapbook.com Artiste glue. I also really like Barely Art glue. And I'm going to line them up in the corner as much as possible before pushing them down, but because I'm using liquid glue, I can kind of just like move things a little bit each time till I get it exactly where I want it, which you can certainly get things lined up with tape adhesive, but also I find that it is harder to get tape runner like into the corners. Not that I put it exactly at the corners, but with the tape runner, it's just a little bit trickier to make sure those corners get held down. And also if like, once I smush it down, the glue moves into the corners a little bit. If I find a corner is kind of like catching or something, I could always go in and just add a bit of extra glue to it. But those are top left, bottom right, and I can again keep just going slowly and checking throughout the whole process to make sure that I have each corner glued the way that I want it to by imagining the finished card. And again, nothing changes if you, at this point, if you are using A4 cardstock and A6 cards, all these measurements are the same. I'm still doing them in inches for that bit. But then when you go to glue them on the card, you glue them in the same order. You're just gonna get a little bit different of a spacing between each element. And I will show you an example of that, as well as there's an example in the example of each card in the workbook. And I just wanted to make sure that the most number of people could find this tutorial helpful. And as you can see, because I'm like, you know, I'm looking up and it says 3 minutes, and I'm like, I probably haven't been gluing for that entire amount of time, but just, you know, these can take a while to assemble, but I think that the end result is a really fun use of patterned paper and a really dynamic looking card. So I think that it's worth it, and I think there are ways you could speed it up in terms of, like, you know, I think there's like there's these tools out. I used to have one, but it doesn't quite fit this larger bottle of glue. But like it, and you also can use like people say they use cups and such to just kind of keep your glue bottle so the glue is staying, like, so it's standing upright, and then the glue staying in the tip, and that can make it a little bit faster, things like that. But taking my time, making sure that I have exactly what I want, and so I will do that for all of my sets of triangles. And then I will show you how to assemble them onto the card. You could, of course, glue all your triangles together, glue them all onto a card, then move to the next one, whichever way of the process makes the most sense to you. All right, let's look at assembling sketch number 1. I think that it's helpful to have the sketch next to if you want it to look exactly the same. However, basically, as long as you glue each one of the triangle pieces into a corner, you will get the similar look. I did pick a specific arrangement of how to glue them for the sketch because I needed to glue it one way, you know, I needed to show it one of the ways, but pretty much any way will look good. You can just kind of play around with it and see what you like, or just follow the way that I have chosen to do it. And then I also wanted to just show it to you quickly on an A6 as well, a little narrower, but also a little taller. However, everything looks pretty similar. None of the measurements stop working, and it gives a very similar result. Okay, so the way that it does show it on the sketch in the workbook is to glue the top left corner first. Then glue the top right and the bottom left. These two, the top right and bottom left, are on the same layer, so it doesn't matter which order you glue them in as long as the bottom right is last. So top left, top right, bottom left, and finally finishing with the bottom right. Again, not really a wrong answer or a wrong way to do this, but if you want to know exactly what the sketch shows or what mine are, that is the order that I will be gluing them in order to stay consistent to the directions and sketch that I have given. And I will continue with that procedure until I have 9 cards, 1 from each tray. Again, I personally am choosing to glue all of the triangles to each other first and then to the card. I think that is a lot simpler. Technically, you could glue down the top left green, then red and holly, like in order on the card, but I find that to be more confusing. And so I glued all the triangles together. Sketch number 2, I don't glue any of the pieces to each other. We just glue them onto the final card. And so there's a small picture of sketch 2 for reference. I have put some tape adhesive on the back of all of my pieces. So these are the back sides. And I am going to just kind of eyeball where I put them all. I'm going to make a good guess about the spacing. But my basic idea is to put 1 stripe at the bottom, then the large rectangle, then the 3 stripes, because this is a group of an odd number of stripes on the top, and then 1 odd number also on the bottom. And I just think balance-wise, it kind of looks good for that bigger strip to be like on the second half of the card, but you could also do one in the center, do the large rectangle in the center, and then I would probably, if I was going to do the large rectangle in the center, I would probably put 2 matching strips next to it. So like a red, and then a holly and a holly. Here, because I am doing, I'm having 3 in 1, I'm going to say do red, holly, red, holly. I'm just giving you examples, but like A, B, or if you want to mix it up and do it with the rectangle in the center, A on here, A here, and then B here, B here. Okay, so again, hopefully that was clear and interesting. If you just wanted to mix it up a little bit because, you're making 6 of the same card, that is a slight way to change it. But also you're mixing up all the patterns. And if you have double-sided paper, you can mix up the patterns even further than I already am. You could, if you have double-sided paper for this part of, you could make each of the 4 strips different, because you could use 2, you have 2 of the same, but you could like flip one the other way, and so it would basically look like this for this card. So there's a lot of possibilities and choices even within these given measurements. I messed up my pattern. I'm supposed to be putting this one here and then like that, and I will assemble all of sketch 2 the same way. I find it a little bit easier if I can put my head like all the way over it, but then I would get in the view here to make things a little bit straighter. But also using a mat with grid lines, using a T-ruler, things like that can help it to be straighter as well. For sketch number 2, if you were working with an A6 card, they're a little bit narrower, a little bit longer, but the same basic layout would remain the same. You could use the same like tips and tricks to like modify or change things up, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like on the slightly different proportions and that it works very easily. All right, so let's talk about embellishing the cards. Now, I said fast festive cards, and you're thinking like, we were really careful with this. How fast was it? Well, when you consider that you didn't have to cut mats for them and how many cards you're making with the same method, I do think it will wind up going relatively fast. And like, it's careful, but it is also in some ways simple. It's just like this triangle pattern. It's very repeated, and it's more just about staying organized, I think. So I did want to address that because I was like, I don't think I would say, you could complete all of these in an hour. However, I do have a class that I shared, I think a couple years ago now, where it is 15 holiday cards in an hour. And it's a similar idea, but I think it goes quite a bit faster and is a little bit less confusing. So if you're a beginner and you're feeling a little overwhelmed at this point, you might enjoy that class more. But there are a lot of similarities between the 2 classes. It's just kind of the ultimate different product at the end. And also that I think this one takes a little bit more time. Okay, so but if anybody times themselves, let me know how long it takes you, I suppose. I have the punch out embellishments and I have the sentiments. I don't think that you need to add a sentiment to every card, but I do like to show how to add sentiments to cards because I know a lot of people do like to have those on their cards. And this is where the scissor might come in handy, because here I could add this merry and bright word along with my holly leaf here. And I would have my holly leaf kind of overhang the edges. I like to like, if there's a box, this is very like a boxy card, very straight lines, kind of having your embellishment come out of the box can be helpful. You could do the same thing with your sentiment. However, because the sentiment is white and the background's white, it doesn't visually break it up as much. So it could be nice to have that in line and let the embellishment be the only thing that kind of comes out of all the lines. And so I like that way of doing it. And I'm sure you could find a couple other similar, and of course you might be using a totally different set of embellishments and the like, but finding more of those to complete all 6 of the cards because they don't need to be all the same. Of course, As mentioned previously, you could be stamping something and then you can stamp 6 of it and have them all be exactly the same, or you could stamp 6 different things and color them all in. In terms of this card, I think it's so pretty and interesting just the way it is. There's like all the different patterns and all the like interestingness of the way they overlap each other that I don't even, it needs a limited amount of embellishment. I think a sentiment in the center could be great. Now, these sentiments in the center strike me as a little too plain. Although if you did it with like a colored piece of cardstock or something like that, and then how I would add the sentiments for this card, I think you could do it in a number of different places. I think that you could do it as a banner along the bottom, although again, this diagonal might not line up with these diagonals. You might have, that might not work for you. You could do it at the top. You could even do it here in the center by doing something like this. I show a couple different examples in the workbook, cutting the diagonals in the same direction and then like placing it with your embellishment here at the center. So this embellishment is quite large and fills up a lot of that white space, but I still think it looks great, and that could be a perfect way of finishing off this card. I think you could pop up any of these embellishments on a little bit of foam tape, or what I call fake foam tape, which is when I take scraps of cardstock and I glue them together, and then I glue that behind things instead of foam tape, and it gives just a little bit of thickness to the cards. I talk about that in many other videos, but I will continue to add embellishments to all of my cards. Now, something I thought, you know, when I first picked out this set online, I thought, well, these make such perfect, simple embellishments for the center of cards. And I absolutely think you could use these. I do notice there's a little bit of the white space showing at the top and bottom. I think that that is fine, but I do understand like you might prefer if it wasn't like that. And then you could take a circle die and cut one, like a circle that's just a slightly bigger than this. You could also fussy cut around this red edge if you would like it to not have that white border for any particular reason. I think there's a lot of different ways you can go with that, but I do recognize like it kind of takes away from that diamond center to basically completely cover it, but I still think it's a really great card and a fun way of kind of like drawing your attention into the center. And then on that one, you could go ahead and put your sentiment right there in the center, or as I mentioned before, just not put a sentiment, because anyone who sees this is going to know it's a Christmas card, and inside you're going to write your Christmas message. On that note, I do have Christmas jokes and holiday jokes, like winter, like if they say like a joke and then happy holidays, or winter, and then a bunch of other themes too. If you're not, you know, if you're following this but you're not making holiday cards, I have jokes for all kinds of different occasions, seasons, themes, etc. on jesscrafts.com, and I'll remember to link that for you, as well as places that you can donate your handmade cards. So say that you made a set of these and 15 cards was enough to share with all the people you wanted to give cards to. You could make a second set to donate or do a mix, or I think that mixing this up for different occasions could be really fun too. Again, I really loved the way that this design looked, and I'm happy, even though this is a very simple card to go with it, I'm happy I thought of a way to make it work within my desire to not have scraps, because I love using pattern paper, but I don't love piles of scraps, and so I think a lot of you can identify with that. I was able to keep adhering all of the patterned paper according to sketch number 1, mixing up the patterns and adding embellishments and sentiments as needed until I completed 9 cards for sketch 1, and then similarly for sketch 2, mixing up the patterns, adding embellishments and sentiments with some of the suggestions provided. Now, as a reminder, you can of course mix up your patterns if you're working with double-sided paper. We talked about that earlier in the video, but I treated mine like single-sided paper just so that you could see how that would work as well. And you can use these same ideas for A6 cards. Here's an example of each sketch with A6, and you can use them to make other themes as well, of course. You don't need to only make Christmas cards with them. Here's like a thank you or just a sort of general encouragement card, a birthday card. You can mix them up as you like. There is the workbook that includes directions and the cutting templates and sketches, large for you to be able to follow along with all the measurements. And there will be things like the samples for both A2 and A6 cards, so you can see what they will look like at the end. So you can find that in the Etsy shop, and there will be a link in the video description to that, as well as to a just sort of general web page where I kind of break down more information about the class. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.